Janica was very blessed as a child. She had a mother who loved her very much, and a group of friends who depended on her very much. They made Janica the hope for second-year class, but it actually backfired on her, because the expectations were so great that she had to carry. It made Janica become very burdened. An explosion suddenly occurred in the building where Janica was, and the conqueror group finally arrived in front of her. She then greeted them using her usual smile. The difference was that her smile was now a little sadistic. Janica was now protected by a pink barrier with chains tied around her body. The dark spirit philosopher was now also seen behind her. They could only be fascinated when they saw the extraordinary power that Janica and Philosopher released. Ed also noticed the commotion. He was surprised that those on Janica's side had just started. This scenario should have ended at dawn, but fortunately, he did not arrive too late. And as he approached the fire spirit Tarkan, he then saw Clebius, who was now still being oppressed by him. Ed then asked where Lucy was. Lortel replied, she was rolling around here, hiding in a corner. Ed would be relieved if Lucy could solve this situation, but Lortel was not sure she had the energy left to do that. Ed then invited her to solve this together. Coincidentally, that was what Lortel had planned to do. She was also surprised at Tarkan's defense. Even after she attacked him using 2 ice spears, given all her magic power, he was still able to survive. Ed suggested beheading him. Her ice magic was not suitable for cutting neatly, so he volunteered to do it. Lortel was confused, since Ed was also a magic user like her. Wouldn't it be better if Clebius, who was a swordsman, did it? Ed then asked if he could. After seeing the state of Clebius, Lortel also realized that he couldn't. Ed said that he would be responsible for end this. He told Lortel to stop the movement of Tarkan once. He would risk his life to her, so he asked her to do it well. Lortel was then surprised to hear that. She was surprised that Ed was talking about accountability and risking his life so casually. Actually, if you think about it, this is an uncertain bet, but Ed said that this is not a bet. Life is not cheap. This is an investment. Lortel smiled at that, because that was her specialty. Instead of acting like a submissive princess, she preferred to act like a ruler with royal blood. Since Ed gave his life to her, she would also hang her life on him. Hearing that, Ed then immediately started, and when Clebius could no longer stand after being chased by Tarkan for so long, Ed then came forward. Tarkan, who saw that, immediately roared towards him. Both of them were almost exhausted. Even so, he understood why Clebius was afraid, because he could also feel how powerful Tarkan was when he got closer. And when Tarkan was about to release a burst of breath, Ed then cast his wind magic, but this was not enough. He had to get closer, but he was then surprised when he saw a giant chained foot suddenly appear above him. Ed realized that it was a Glaskin foot. Clebius was also surprised when he saw it. Ed then wondered if this meant that Taylor and his group were entering the last phase, meaning that things were going as expected. But the timing was not right. Anyone would definitely be distracted when seeing a scene like that, and Tarkan didn't stop his breathing at all. He wasn't bothered by it, but, even in the midst of this huge chaos, Lortel didn't make a mistake. Lortel's attack managed to crack Tarkan's skin. He looked shocked by it, and Ed finally managed to get closer to him. This was the spell he had cast hundreds or even thousands of times. Windblade, an extremely powerful and amazing windblade that finally managed to cut Tarkan's neck neatly. He then got a system notification after successfully defeating High Fire Spirit Tarkan, and his magic spirit proficiency also increased dramatically because of that. The spirit contract slot has been opened. He can now make a contract with the spirit, but Ed's attention was immediately distracted when he saw Taylor's action. Taylor was seen speeding towards Glaskin's chained legs, and when he got close, he then immediately sent a very strong slash, which created a very powerful explosion effect. Taylor then just fell and looked unconscious after launching his attack. Ed, who saw it, could only lament that Taylor was really the protagonist, with lightning striking and bright lights illuminating the sky above them, which signaled the end of this sudden catastrophe. The next day, when the sun had just risen to illuminate the world, Ed and his group were seen leaning under a tree while enjoying the morning sun. Seeing Ed's flat expression, Lortel then asked what was wrong with him. They had just survived the crisis between life and death, but his sentiments seemed to be too brief. She then stretched out her hand and invited him to get acquainted properly. "I am Lortel Ketchon." Ed did not refuse, but he was then surprised when he saw some gold coins in his hand. It was certainly Lortel's doing. She took advantage of the introduction between them to return the gold coins she had originally promised. now he owes her. Lortel then said goodbye. Ed knew that Lortel wanted to try to maintain a relationship, but he didn't really want to have anything to do with her. But he was then surprised when Taylor suddenly approached him. Taylor said that he harbored hatred for him. He probably knew better. Seeing Taylor's new appearance now that his hair turned white, Ed realized that it was a manifestation of the Sword Saint ritual, just like in the game. It was really impressive to him. Taylor continued, even so, he owed him a big thanks. While bowing, Taylor then sincerely thanked him. Clebius, who saw that, then told Taylor not to be so polite to people like Ed. One day, he wouldn't be surprised if he would stab them in the back. He almost died because of him. He seemed to still have a grudge with Ed for abandoning him when fighting Tarkhan. After hearing Clebius' words, they then immediately told him to shut up. Phinia also admitted that Ed had a big contribution this time. She then invited him to enter the student council, but Ed immediately denied it and refused his invitation. Instead, the main damage provider in the conquest of Tarkhan was Lucy, and Taylor also defeated Velasfer and Glaskin. He asked her to focus on that. Elvira then mocked him when she saw Ed so humble. Everyone knows the contribution of Lucy and Taylor. They are talking about other things. He told her not to be shy. Zix then told Elvira to respect Ed a little. Because he was her senior, Elvira was annoyed that Zix always took his side. Zix only asked her to show respect to Ed, so as not to affect the original storyline too much. He kept his distance from the main characters, but, when he saw them now, he couldn't help but feel warm. Even Ed couldn't help but smile at this moment, watching them in this world, playing their own roles, solving their own problems time after time. Taylor, who became strong in every trial, Isla, who became strong for Taylor, Phinia, who accepted her destiny as a princess, and slowly matured, Zix, who found his own way in the cracks of society, Clebius, who grew his confidence, and Elvira, who realized that pleasure and satisfaction are not everything in life. Lortel, who spent her life buried under a pile of gold coins, questioning her own life. All the main characters, with their respective roles, and in the end, the trophy of success. Realizing this fact, Ed then went to the place that he couldn't visit during the scenario. He then walked towards the cupboard beside the duel arena, looking at the cupboard lying in front of him. No matter how he thought, there were some things that felt lacking. That's why he was here, to shine light the success of the protagonists. Someone had to stay behind the curtain. Janica just chuckled when Ed found her. He then recalled when he was with Lortel. He asked why Janica was having a tantrum. Lortel said that she seemed to know the reason. She once happened to look into Janica's room. What she saw, there was a lot of sincere thanks, but, on her spacious desk, there was not even room to fully open a book. The quotes stuck on the wall weighed on her shoulders like a stone. The solution was actually very easy, just remove all the quotes from the wall and clean the table full of gifts piled up. But Janica's misery was that she was like a fairy tale character who was impossible to do such a thing. Feeling compelled to repay every kindness and sincerity with all her efforts, it was certainly a reckless act. There was no need to explain how stupid her thoughts were. The Velocipher dived into that darkness. Then Janica's tantrum could not be prevented. But Ed was confused. Why did it happen 1 month earlier than he expected? At the joint combat training, the original, Taylor was supposed to be the protagonist of this scenario, but with Lucy defeating Taylor in one attack, all the students turned into Janica fans. The reason Taylor could be defeated in one attack was because Lucy made a deal with Marilda. The opportunity to make a contract with Marilda arose because she often went to the North Forest, and she often went there because it was the perfect place for her to take a nap. The place to sleep was made by a character who was supposed to leave the stage at the beginning of Act 1. After being discovered by Ed, Janica just said she felt she knew why Lucy liked to nap here. It was very comfortable. She just didn't expect Ed to find it this easily. She thought the others had forgotten about her amidst all the chaos. It was a bit painful for her, after walking so proudly on the big stage, then forgotten after the problem was over. She thought they would immediately look for her whereabouts after seeing her disappear, but Ed said that she was hiding because she didn't want to be found. Janica didn't dodge. She didn't expect to be found this quickly. Even though she wanted to hide a little longer before going out, Ed then asked why. Janica replied she wanted to almost ugly cry now. Ed could only be silent hearing that. He then recalled the plea made by Marilda at that time. It seemed like a plea to save Janica from this incident, but he felt that it was impossible. because only he knew the future. Maybe what she meant was when everyone burdened Janica with attention, she probably thought that someone who kept her distance without being interested in Janica, could be someone she could rely on, but in the end, Janica's attempt failed. She tried to make a contract with the new high elemental spirit, but she rushed to do the summon ritual, then ended up being devoured by the dark spirit, and destroyed the faculty building in the process, studying and practicing magic until midnight, smiling for the sake of family, friends, and professors who supported her. But when she tried so hard to meet everyone's expectations, she must have had a really hard time in private, since that process itself was beautiful. Ironically, it made her failures also beautiful. Ed wasn't sure if this could comfort her. He then called out to her and said, "You've worked very hard." The parade of protagonists proudly crossed the stage above, amidst the applause and amazement. Meanwhile, backstage was quiet and dark. The end of Villain Act 1 was covered by the highlighted protagonists. Janica could only shed her tears after getting consolation from Ed. The spirits then suddenly floated to light up the room beautifully. Ed was amazed when he saw it. He had never witnessed a scene like this before. Of all the times he watched Act 1, only now he felt he had finally reached the end point. His magic spirit then rose to level 10, and some spirits began to have an interest in him, including the high wind spirit Marilda. Before he knew it, it had been 10 days since Janica's disciplinary committee finished. She confessed all her wrongdoings, and stated she would accept any punishment. However, from the first trial, her professors and friends came to her defense. At the second trial, Fenia declared she would not prosecute for the attempted murder of royalty, and testified that Janica, controlled by the philosopher, had no ill intent. Lortel acted to address the injuries and damages. The Elk Merchant Association fully funded the repairs without charging, of course. They made additional provisions to have the budget for the academic supplies they distributed to the school, and the final result of the trial was, Janica's privileges as a top-ranking student were revoked. All honor awards were returned. She was banned from entering Ophelis from the next semester. She was also kept under house arrest for 10 days and suspended for 20 days. But in exchange, she was not expelled from the academy. The professors and friends who supported her cheered happily when they heard the news. It was like a heart-wrenching youth drama. The friends were grateful that it was over, but they looked at Janica, who still looked gloomy. They felt that Janica must be very stressed at this time. Then, it was their turn to act. They then served Janica with drinks and ate sweet food to comfort her. They also whispered to never mention the Glaskin incident, and don't show unnecessary worry. Moreover, don't ask how she feels. It's better to talk about light and ordinary topics. They then agreed on that and prepared to encourage Janica. But Janica suddenly said, liking and loving someone, why do these two feelings feel so different? They were surprised when Janica suddenly talked about it. Janica then stammered, saying that it was about her friend. Blushing, she said, her friend was dreaming. After arranging a flower arrangement for someone, she was suddenly called from behind by someone. The person looked like Ed, who looked like a prince with his white horse. She then placed the flower arrangement on Ed's head and said that she made this for him, and they then had fun together. Janica said that her friend kept dreaming like that, but they immediately knew the truth behind Janica's clumsy lie. Because she couldn't even see anyone during the 10 days of house arrest, but they pretended not to know and asked, then what did her friend say again? Janica said, she sat in the room and daydreamed. Suddenly that person's face always appeared in her mind. Hearing that, one of her friends named Anise immediately ran away on the pretext that she had promised to help the assistant professor. Now only Clara is left. In order not to hurt Janica's sensitive heart, she must have this conversation. Slowly and carefully, one mistake will spread to the whole school, because this is the love story of Janica Faylover. She then called Janica and said, maybe you are thinking too much about it. Liking or hating someone is more complex than she thinks. Janica then asked, is it? Clara continued, isn't it better to just be honest with your feelings now? Isn't it better for you or for that person? Janica felt that Clara had a point. Clara then suggested to be careful in talking about this sensitive issue in the future. It could not be good for her reputation, or her friend, or that person. Janica finally realized that. Clara was relieved because she managed to prevent rumors. Janica then thanked her for her advice. She said she would go back to the Ophelis Hall first to report on her suspension, while Clara just said she would sit here longer. She needed to think about something. She then waved her hand towards Janica as a form of farewell. Clara could finally be relieved after successfully encouraging Janica and preventing Janica from becoming more depressed. Back to Ed, he had been saving money endlessly. But thanks to Phinia, his fees for the next semester were waived. He then bought some equipment with the gold coins he had now. He was then surprised when he saw Janica in front of him. He had been avoiding her, but now that Act 1 starring Janica was over, Ed then took the initiative to greet her. He felt that maybe it didn't matter if he greeted her first. While Janica herself looked surprised when Ed suddenly greeted her, she then felt panicked and embarrassed to answer back his greeting. But she then didn't know what else to say. She then remembered Clara's words. She had to be honest with her feelings. Until finally she chose to run away on the pretext that she had a need in the Awfulest Hall. It was too hard for Janica, and Ed Roth Taylor, who made the kind Janica be truthful, was kinda amazing in a way, but Ed then decided not to think about it too much, because he was going to be very busy too, looking at the spacious land in front of him. It was time to build the cabin he planned. On the first day, it started with selecting a shady, spacious, and inconspicuous location, then started with leveling the land. On the third day, he started collecting wood. This work was made easy thanks to his high wind blade proficiency. On the sixth day, he temporarily paused the construction of the cabin because the results of the end of semester exam had come out. His score was quite high in theory and his practical score was much higher than the average new student, but he was confused because Janica was still ignoring him. Janica's friends, Clara and Anise, signaled him to stay away. Even though he had no intention of approaching, on day 18, the construction of his cabin was almost complete. He wondered if there was anyone else who honed the wind blade skill so expertly like him. On day 20, the vacation began. He could dedicate all his time to the construction of his cabin. He also found Lucy, who was caught in the trap he set earlier, in a state of deep sleep. He felt it was time to stop using jerky as bait. On the 27th day, Maya visited. She also shared some herbs and mushrooms with him. When she asked about what happened to Janica, he replied that he seemed to have made Janica hate him, and Maya looked confused when she heard his answer. On the 30th day, one side of his wooden wall collapsed. He realized then that installing the joints properly wasn't enough to keep it up. He was upset about it, and when he went to school, he ran into Janica and her friends again near the dorm bakery. Janica, as usual, ran away as soon as their eyes met, and her friends were now looking at him with hatred. On the 37th day, Zix came to help. He then said that Taylor was a better person than he thought. As Ed had said before, Ed was happy that things were going according to his original story. Zix then asked if they were going to hammer this whole side too. Ed said no. He told him to leave that part alone. It was a place for sloppy smoke. And on the 45th day, Ed then walked to the cabin he had worked so hard to build. He then sat down to enjoy the fruits of his labor. Neither the floor nor the walls had been polished, and there was not a single piece of furniture. This was just a cabin made of rough wood, but it has this outer wall and roof. No insects can enter if the door is closed. Ed then stretched his neck while smiling slightly. A system notification then appeared. His crafting proficiency increased after successfully crafting a wooden cabin with a difficulty level of 4 stars, and Ed now finally has his own home. Outside the cabin, Janica was seen hiding behind a tree. She was currently peeking at Ed with a feeling of embarrassment. Ed then thought about what else he needed to add to his cabin. He felt that adding walls, floors, furniture, a fireplace, and a fence might be a good idea. He also felt that it would be good to have a small storage shed for firewood and other items. Ed suddenly noticed the presence of someone on the roof of his cabin. That person turned out to be Lucy, who was now fast asleep on the roof. But Ed was then surprised when he saw someone suddenly greeting him. That person was Janica. Ed then greeted her back. He also asked what made her come here. Janica immediately sweated and could only smile awkwardly at his question. She then recalled her conversation with Maya. While combing her hair, Maya told her. At that time she visited the forest and saw an interesting sight at Ed's camp. Janica then asked if she meant his hut. Hearing that, Maya then asked how she knew. Janica only replied that she saw it while passing by. Maya could only accept the random answer from Janica. She continued, she said Ed himself built it. Surprisingly, the shape looked good, quite satisfying. She didn't know that Ed had such talent. Janica was happy when Maya praised Ed. Maya said she also wanted to go inside the cabin. She wanted to see the contents and confirm its sturdiness. Janica blushed after hearing that, because she also had such thoughts. Maya again whispered in her ear. After all, she was human. Wouldn't anyone passing by be curious about who built it and what was inside? That's a normal response. Maya's whisper is like the devil's whisper for Janica. Back to Ed. Blushingly Janica then said that she was just passing by, as if she wanted to visit Marilda. She saw the cabin and wanted to check it out. Wasn't he curious about who made it and what was in it? Isn't that normal? Hearing that Ed could only answer yes. Janica then embarrassedly praised that the cabin was cool. Ed said that he built it not long ago. Did the spirits not tell him? Janica stammeringly replied that the spirits did tell her, but only just, which made him think, oh, apparently there is a cabin there. Janica lied, because in fact she had ordered the spirits to spy on Ed's daily life all this time. She also asked them to tell her about Ed's body that they peeped into. She even always had nosebleeds every time she listened to reports from the spirits. But Janica still said that she didn't chat much with the spirits. She didn't know much about Ed's daily activities, but she was then surprised when Ed suddenly invited her to go into his cabin for a while. Janica immediately blushed and happily accepted his invitation. Once inside, Janica was amazed and wondered if Ed himself made all this, and without realizing that night had finally arrived, they then made a campfire to warm themselves. After receiving a cup of warm water from Ed, Janica then said that she owed a lot this time. Even the princess and Lortel went that far. There were also friends who offered to lend her dues money. She confusedly asked how she could pay all this. Ed was silent for a moment after hearing that. He then said, if she couldn't pay it, then forget it. The idea that she had to pay the debt was probably a deeply ingrained idea. Janica had never thought of it that way. Indeed, Janica was that kind of person. Her problem started because she was burdened by that sincerity, something that many people didn't understand. Although there were many people who offered to provide help, or lend her the dues money, she then decided to choose to enter the outdated Dex Hall instead of the upper-level Ophilus Hall, perhaps to reduce her debt even a little. But in Ophilus Hall, one room is for one person, while in Dex Hall one room is for 8 or more people. For Janica, all day being in the middle of many people looking at her enviously must have felt like being imprisoned. In the end, none of the problems were solved. She has not been able to get out of the vicious circle. Ed then said, if she wants to enjoy her own time, she can come here and stay whenever she wants. He doesn't mind. Janica was silent for a moment after hearing that. She then smiled and accepted his offer. She also thanked him for that. She also asked Ed to tell her if he was having a hard time or there was something that was very difficult to face alone. She promised that she would definitely help. Ed just smiled at that. He also pondered what difficulties he would face. The second semester would come soon. It was time for Act 2 to start. That old book, The Sage's Scroll, a book written by the great sage of Sylvania that contains holy magic. Holy study is known as a high-level magic discipline that defies the laws of the world. The storm triggered by it will devour the entire academy. Looking at the protected book in front of her, Lortel could smell the scent of money from it, but still, Ed felt that it would not happen, so he refused Janica's helping hand. He appreciated her intentions, but it would not happen. To him, it seemed that it was Taylor who would soon face a difficult time. This was not really his business, but it would be very difficult. He then encouraged himself. The Failed Swordsman of Sylvania, Act 2, the Ophilus Hall Occupation Incident. The upperclassmen at Ophilus Hall were like a nobleman, priority seating in class, freedom at mealtimes, personal servants, and other comforts that were on a whole different level. The problem began here. As soon as the vacation ended and the return to the academy began, heavy rains poured down on the southwestern part of the Belair region, where the island of Arkan was located. The academy, normally, provided horse-drawn carriages to return to the academy in ships exclusively for the students of Ophilus Hall, and even allowed several days of tardiness without penalty. On the contrary, for the students of Dex Hall, even those who managed to reach the academy after braving the torrential rain, worried about the penalties that could be earned for missing the deadline of returning to the academy. Right here it exploded, of course. All this happened because of the intervention of a certain merchant. That merchant had already made contact with Will Rain, the representative of the low-ranked students. This person was just planning a way to launch an attack on the academy in Ophilus Hall. The discontent that had already peaked was enough to give a reason that would trigger the anger of the low-ranked students and ordinary students, and the rest would be taken care of by Will Rain, a master of incitement and oratory. The situation was ready. A clear difference in service between ordinary students who had to go through a torrential downpour to return to the academy, and the special treatment for Offalis Hall students, Lortel then sent a proposal to adjust and support the flexible return period given specifically to Offalis Hall students. Some of the butlers and administrative review departments that manage the Offalis Hall are already on Lortel's side. They will support Lortel's proposal. At this point, it is not important whether the Academy does accept Lortel's proposal or not. Just seriously discussing such a proposal is enough to trigger the anger of the lower-ranked students. The situation should be made as big and exciting as possible. The Offalis Hall is filled with artworks entrusted by noble and influential families. The walls, carpets, and wooden furniture are all the work of craftsmen. The more property damage, the better. Ideally, destroying the Offalis Hall would be best. If they caused a big enough mess, it would deal a fatal blow to the Academy's finances, which were already cornered by the Glasgow incident. And it would give the Elk Merchant Association an advantage in the ongoing negotiations regarding the purchase of the Sage's Scroll. The Sage's Scroll is the heart of Sylvania, a magic tome, but sometimes those who are cornered will put even their heart into the negotiation table. Looking at the rain that never stopped, she then wondered when the rain would stop, the supportive sky without sunlight. Just like the sky she used to see through the leaking roof tiles in the slums, she mocked herself for being comfortable. This romantic learning center has a lot of light sources. In the darkness inherent in life, this dirty self is increasingly apparent, a table full of traces of conspiracy, evidence of a dark life, always attacking from behind and doubting the intentions of others, the characteristics of a life filled with desperation to survive. While trying to survive, somehow it has become like that. But this did not change her filthy and tainted origin, so as if bewitched, she wandered around looking for someone similar, even in Sylvania, which is filled with shining people, whether there could be anyone who would accept a filthy and tainted mouse. Relying on uncertain hope, wandering aimlessly in search of family ties, Lortel suddenly feels lonely, the nature of which never changes. Lortel's attitude to survive the sad reality is always the same. Lortel is always the dark curtain that hides the grim truth behind the scenes. The audience calls it the black curtain. In the original story, the Offalis Hall occupation incident was a story where the protagonist had to stop the low-ranking students triggered by Lortel in Offalis Hall on several floors. There were mid-bosses who helped the low-ranking students and hindered the protagonist. The first-floor mid-boss Windcatcher Tote, he was the one who mocked Taylor as a failed student, was easily bribed by Lortel after holding a grudge for being defeated by Taylor's group. His role was to overcome the new servants guarding the first floor, and open the door of Offalis Hall, to let the students in. The students were then shocked and they saw the door suddenly open from the inside. They then immediately rushed inside, hoping that their cries could be better heard by the Academy. And when the students passed through the first floor, the person who played the role of stopping the protagonist's group from coming to block them was the first act two-phase boss, Windcatcher Tote. But when Will Rain met him, he was shocked because he didn't think that the person who was bribed by Lortel was someone he never expected. Tote was supposed to do this role at first, but somehow Ed replaced him. And he himself was surprised because he had become the mid-boss now.